here. Okay, we'll start with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Welcome, everybody. It's so good to see you. And I just want to announce now, but I'll announce at the end also that we will not have class next Thursday, which is Thanksgiving, but also I'll be out of town. I'm going to Florida to visit our daughter and her family in their new home in Florida, a completely different life and lifestyle than the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So I'll be gone. So I want in advance, and then Hanukkah will be starting next Sunday night. So I won't see you before we start Hanukkah. So I wanted to talk about Hanukkah in the context of our Parsha. So our Parsha this week, we are in the Parshas in Bereshit that kind of all sound the same and that are very confusing. We have Vayetze, Vayishlach, and Vayeshev, which to me basically all sound kind of like the same thing. But we are now in the Parsha of Vayishlach, and the Parsha begins on page 171. And this, we open up with Jacob, who has now left Laban's household with all of his possessions, his wives, and his children. Everyone has been born except for Benjamin. Rachel is pregnant with Benjamin at this point, but he has not been born. Jacob leaves Laban's house after Joseph is born. It seems like after Joseph is born, the son of Rachel, that then they're able to go, and he is on his way. And when he finds out, after he has confronted Laban, he then finds out one thing after the next with Yaakov is that he finds out that there is he sends angels ahead of him. Jacob sends angels ahead of him, verse 4, to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir. And he says, to my lord, to Esau, so said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and have lingered until now. I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants, and maidservants, and I'm sending to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes. And the angels return to him. Hold on one moment, let me just let somebody in. The angels return to him, and they say, we came to your brother, to Esau. Moreover, he is heading toward you, and 400 men are with him. This is what Yaakov is getting ready to face, which is the Esau coming with 400 men. As we know, Esau has only wanted to kill and destroy Jacob, and now he's coming toward him with 400 men. Jacob has a lot, but he doesn't have 400 men. He has his wives and children and his cattle and all of those kinds of possessions, but he does not have the wherewithal to really come up against Esau with 400 men if Esau is bent on killing him. What's going to happen is the very, very famous preparations that Yaakov makes. First of all, it's very interesting. On page 173, it says, verse 8, that Yaakov became very frightened and it distressed him. It says, what distressed him? It says, it distressed him that he was afraid. It says that a righteous person is not afraid because God controls everything. So he was distressed, like, why am I feeling afraid? So he makes a plan, and he feels that he needs to do something, which is his hishtadlut. He needs to make some sort of preparations. He divides the people with him, and he sends, like, if Esau is going to attack him, that at least maybe some people will live, even if some people are killed. So he does that, and he divides the camp up. And he says, verse 10, then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Hashem, who said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. I have been diminished by all the kindnesses and by all the truth you have done your servant. So he says that he feels that God's kindness, that he's in a deficit position, that God has done so much for him. He feels like he's used up his points. He's used up his account of why God should do something for him. And in fact, that's one of the hallmarks of somebody who is a righteous person, which is God has done so much for me. I don't deserve any more. So that his fear in a way was coming from a place of humility as opposed to genuine fear of Esau. that his fear is coming from a place, I don't really deserve any more benefit. God has been so kind to me. Now, what I want to point out, oh, I'm sorry, it says, for with my staff, I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear lest he come and strike me down, mother and children. And you had said, I will surely do good with you, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, which is too numerous to count. So he spends the night there, and he takes a tribute, and he's going to send it to Esau, and he goes into a whole description of that. And then we're going to go to page 175. And it says verse 23, but he got up that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Yabok. And when he took them and had them cross over the stream, he sent over all his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. Now, this is probably one of the iconic scenes from the Torah, is when Jacob is going to be wrestling, and it says, with a man. However, all of our sages say that it wasn't some random man who came to attack Jacob, that it was the angel of Esau, Sar Esau, came to fight Jacob. Now, psychologists have looked at this from a psychological perspective of Jacob was wrestling with the fact that he had done something wrong to Esau by taking the blessing, that there was something that there was some sort of an internal battle going on. But at the most basic level, what we're looking at is that Jacob is wrestling with the angel of Esau. And Esau's angel, thankfully, is not able to prevail over him. And what happens? It says on verse 26, when he perceived, meaning the angel, that he could not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So Jacob's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for dawn has broken. And he, Jacob, said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He said to him, what is your name? He replied, Jacob. He said, no longer will it be said that your name is Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with the divine and with man and have overcome. He blesses him, and Jacob is left then for verse 32. The sun rose for him as he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore, the children of Israel are not to eat the displaced sinew on the hip socket to this day, because he struck Jacob's hip socket on the displaced sinew. It's like, this is quite an elaborate description about this, that if this is a psychological battle, why does he wake up and he really is hurting? Okay, he really is hurting, that something has actually happened. There has been some sort of a real confrontation. So the sages ask, why the hip socket? What does that even mean? So now we all know, given laws of kashrut, and we're not really here to talk about all the specifics of the laws of kashrut, we do not eat the hind quarter of animals because of that sinew that is in the hind quarter. You can eat it if you can remove that sinew, because it says we don't eat it because of this battle. It's like the Jewish people have had a lot of battles. We don't commemorate any one of them with any kind of eating prohibition. But when you have something like the Jewish people, if you want to have something that's going to be forever emblazoned in our minds and heart, make it have to do with eating, because we eat all the time, which means we have to always be paying attention. Where's this meat from? Oh, we don't eat that because of Jacob. We don't eat that because of Jacob's battle with the angel of Esau. But we still have to go back to the question and ask, why did he attack him in the sinew? Like, why there? You could say, well, it was a wrestling match. That's like a likely place. Why didn't he bonk him in the head? Why didn't he twist his arm? Why didn't he punch him in the stomach? I mean, there could have been a lot of other places that were attacked, but it was specifically in his thigh, his upper thigh. So there's a whole Kabbalistic explanation. And I read this is from Rabbi Daniel Gladstein, who's quoting other sages, but it was really fascinating. Said on the body, the hip socket is where the legs are attached to the trunk. That's basically where we get our support. And that was the attack, that he was trying to undermine Jacob's support. It's like, what's Jacob's support? So the support of Jacob comes down to, on the mystical tree of life, it's called, the legs are called the Sfirot of Netzach and Hod. If you were ever to see and I don't have one with all my papers. I probably have one someplace. But if you ever see an outline of the mystical tree of life that is shaped like the human body, you'll see that the upper spherot are the head, and then you have the arms, and you have the torso, and you have the reproductive organs, and then you have the legs, and then the reproductive organs. The legs are Netzach and Hod. It says Netzach and Hod are the two holidays of Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah and Purim are Netzach and Hod. They hold up the Jewish people. It's like, what does that even mean? Hanukkah and Purim, the two miracle holidays, are what hold up the Jewish people, and Esav tried to injure those. What's interesting is if we look at those two holidays of Hanukkah and Purim, they were both precipitated by descendants of Esav. So Esav, who became the Greeks and the Romans, Edom, those are the people who tried to thwart the Jewish people. And Hanukkah was where they tried to destroy us as a nation. They tried to destroy us not bodily, but through the spiritual. Don't study Torah, don't have Brit Milah, don't keep kosher, don't observe Shabbos, don't read from the Torah, don't study the Torah. They weren't interested in killing our bodies. They wanted to kill Judaism. On the other hand, we have Purim, which is perpetrated by the descendant of also Esav in the form of Amalek. Amalek was the grandson of Esav. His descendant is Haman. Haman wanted to obliterate us bodily, annihilate every man, woman, and child. Between those two pillars, so that's what the Jewish people stand on, our bodies and our souls, the physical world and the spiritual world. Those are the two legs of the Jewish people, and Esav is behind both of those challenges to us. And so the injury is in the hip socket where those legs are attached. And it said that there was an impact. Jacob was limping. Afterwards, he prevailed, but he was limping. And that this is a commentary on the state of the Jewish people in exile, because this whole thing happened in exile. Jacob was on his way back from Laban, going back into the land of Israel, and it happened while he was out. This is like, what happens? It says there's an exile because the Hanukkah story takes place in the land of Israel, but it's under the Greek rule. So in a way, we were in exile in our own land. And of course, the holiday of Purim is in the land of Persia when we truly were in exile, part of the Babylonian exile. The truth is that we are in exile, even if you are in the land of Israel, even if you're standing in Jerusalem, if you were to celebrate your Passover Seder in Jerusalem, sitting in front of the Kotel, you would still end your Seder, L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim Habniyah, next year in the land of the rebuilt Jerusalem, because we're there partly, but we're limping. We are limping. And so we have the double threat, and we are surrounded by the dual threat, both to our bodies of people who want to annihilate us and people who want to diminish Judaism, who want the Torah just to be kind of watered down and go away, and can't you just blend in with everybody else? Those threats, those simultaneous threats, are called the legs of the Jewish people, the legs of Jacob. And Jacob does battle with them, and he's left limping. So we have these two kind of the holidays are called friends. And it's interesting because in our davening for both Purim and Hanukkah, we introduce the Al Hanisim prayer, and for the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. And it's for these miracles. And the introduction is the same. And then in any bencher you look at, it gets really confusing. It breaks down into two columns, the one that you say for Purim and the one you say for Hanukkah, because the two really kind of go together, these two holidays. Now, what's really wonderful about these holidays is, unlike Shabbos and unlike Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot, we never make Havdalah at the end of those holidays. We do not make Havdalah at the end of Purim or at the end of Hanukkah. We always make Havdalah at the end of Shabbos. We make Havdalah at the end of Pesach. We make Havdalah at the end of Sukkot, and we make Havdalah at the end of Shavuot. But we do not make Havdalah at the end of Purim or Hanukkah, which means, because Havdalah means to separate, that those other high holidays are in a different realm that we actually take leave from. That's what we say, we take leave from them. We never take leave from Hanukkah or Purim. which is really fascinating, which means that we have access to the spiritual energy of both of those holidays all year round. It is always Purim. It is always Hanukkah. The Jewish people live with the duality of those two holidays in every age. If it's not a pressure for assimilation, it's a pressure of trying to actually physically destroy us. We are always all struggling with Esau's angel. We are always all in relationship with that brother who is trying to hurt us. Now you could say, that's really, thanks a lot. Why do we have to hear that? Life is a battle. It's like, yes, life is. Life is a struggle. And knowing that it's a struggle helps prepare us to face that struggle. And we can take the approach of both Jacob and Jacob, what he did in his striving against the angel. So that's what our name means of Yisrael, is to strive with the divine and to prevail. Hanukkah and Purim are both the holidays where we succeeded, at least momentarily, to be able to prevail in that struggle. We know that the battle of Hanukkah against the Syrian Greeks was a very long time. It was over 10 years. It was years that went on. Not only that, it was made worse because it was primarily, or not primarily, it included a civil war against assimilated Jews versus religious Jews. The assimilated Jews who wanted the Jewish people to just kind of, why can't we have a melting pot? Greek culture is so amazing. Let's just blend in. Let's just blend in. And the Maccabees were like, no, the Torah has to stand pure. The Torah has to stand pure. So we have that pressure all the time of the assimilation versus the actual physical destruction, anti-Semitic acts where people are trying to physically kill us. It's like, we need to know. And we get our strength from the fact that Jacob prevailed in this Parsha. So we may go away limping, but we will never be wiped out. But each person needs to struggle. Now, individual people, God forbid, people do assimilate, people are killed. One of the statistics that Rabbi Lau shared last night was the number of Jewish people in the United States. And it's about 6 million. It's less than 6 million. Well, guess how many Jews there were in America before World War II? 6 million. Which means something has gone very wrong if we still have the same number. If you had people getting married and only having 2 children, what he said, this is from professors, I don't know if it was at Bar-Ilan or which university, I wasn't paying attention to that part of the quotation. There should be 35 million Jews by now over the past 70 years. It's like, where are we? It's like, gone. And it wasn't through killing, it was through assimilation and gone. Intermarriage, assimilation, and they're gone. They're gone. Or not having children and gone. So it's like, what's our challenge? It's like, our challenge is on both sides. Both sides, we have this challenge. And Jacob was the one who has this initial struggle, and he's the one who is able to prevail, even though he leaves limping, and we are limping. So now we have a better, deeper understanding about why we would have a law of kashrut that would remind us of this struggle. It's like, why do we have something else? Why wasn't he struck someplace else? It's like, no, he was struck on these 2 aspects that we are challenged with in our own personal lives and the lives of our community. You know, we live in a Christian nation. God bless it. It has many wonderful values, but it is, and the land of Israel too. It is not under a Torah government. And there's a lot of pressure in Israel to not be so Jewish. It's really challenging. So until Mashiach comes, we have this challenge. We stop and take a break on the holidays of Purim and on Hanukkah to strengthen our resolve, to recommit, which is what Hanukkah means. It means dedication. And we focus on educating ourselves, which is also chinuch, education, about these holidays and about our lives so that we know what to do in order to preserve ourselves and to preserve the eternal aspect of our people. We are guaranteed eternality, but not every individual person is guaranteed that. We each have our own work to do, our own personal and private struggle. And as they say, the struggle is real. There is an incredible amount of pressure. So what's our best antidote to this? It says our best antidote says, finally, when all things are said and done, the best antidote is Torah study, what we are doing all together here today. And the more Torah study, the more strength. It says Yaakov is the symbol of Torah study. He's described when he is first born, when he's young, that he was the person, Yoshev Ohalim, that he sat in the tents. And it meant that it wasn't just like sitting around playing video games, that he sat in the tent of learning, that he was studying Torah. In Pirkei Avot, it talks about that the world is upheld by three things: Al HaTorah, Al Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. And that those three pillars are represented also by our patriarchs, by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Probably a good, easy guess that Abraham is Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness, since he was known for chesed. Yitzchak is avodah, service, just the fact that he was offered on the Mizbeach as an offering, as a korban, makes him the person who symbolized service of God in that way of prayer, sacrifices, etc. And Al HaTorah is Jacob, that he was the person who represented Torah study, and that his diligence in Torah study is what created the ability for him to prevail against Esav, and it also is what allowed the miracles of Purim and Hanukkah to happen. And we're going to talk specifically about the miracle of Hanukkah. How does it come from Jacob? Okay, how does it come from Jacob? So let's go back for just a moment, and we're going to go backwards. We're just going to pick up here a little bit. We are going to look just back at, hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay. Now I lost my place. I'm sorry. I'm looking where it says that he took his staff. If anyone finds it, come tell me. Okay. No. I'm so sorry. Is anyone finding this? That he comes with his staff? He crossed the staff.
I think it's verse 11.
Thank you, Patricia.
Sure. Or yeah, for with my staff.
Yes, thank you. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Page 173. He says, I have been diminished by all the kindnesses and by all the truth that you have done your servant. For with my staff, I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Okay, sounds like just a description. First of all, why would you even say that? I came with my staff and I crossed the Jordan. He crossed the Jordan to leave Israel, and now became two camps, meaning with Rachel and Leah, he's become like a big group. And now, but he's saying specifically about having gone with his staff, that he crossed the Jordan. Now, why is he saying that? If you remember, when Jacob leaves and flees his house, that Esau wants to kill him. And Rachel and Isaac send him away, and he leaves, and she says, go to my brother and stay there to Laban and until your brother cools off. Okay, we've got that part of the story. And Jacob flees. It says, what happens? It says, Jacob is actually pursued by Esau's son, Eliphaz. Eliphaz was Esau's son, and Esau had given him the order, kill Jacob. He catches up with Jacob. Eliphaz catches up with Jacob, and he has a big problem. Eliphaz grew up in the house of Isaac. He knows that should not kill Jacob, and yet he also observes, like his father, the mitzvah of kibud av v'em, of honoring his father and his mother. His father said, kill Jacob. So now what's he supposed to do? He has an order to kill Jacob, and he knows that he shouldn't. So he says to Jacob, what am I supposed to do? My father has ordered me to kill you, but I know that I can't. But I can't return to him without killing you. It So this is all in the commentary. It says that Jacob said to him, really good question, take everything I own. Take everything I own, because it says that a poor person is the same as dead. A person who has absolutely nothing, he's the same as dead. In that way, you can tell your father, you took everything and I'm dead. So Eliphaz does this. There's just one thing, and it says that there's further midrash that says that he even took his clothes, all his clothes, and that Jacob had to go into a river because it was naked, and that somebody just happened to come by. A prince came by on a carriage. This is like a fabulous, like fairy tale sounding story. And the carriage tipped over, the prince drowned, and then Jacob took the prince's clothes. And so that was what he had, was the clothes. And then he goes to Laban and then is going to marry Rachel and Leah. We know that when Jacob came to Laban, he had absolutely nothing. That's why one of the reasons Laban was like, what do I need you for? If we remember that when Eliezer came to the same family to get the wife for Isaac, he came loaded with camels and with gifts, and he's giving Rebecca all sorts of things. Jacob shows up with nothing, which is why he then had to work for Laban for 7 years. He had nothing. And that's where the Midrash comes in. It's like, how could he possibly have had nothing? It's like, well, someone must have taken his something between the home and when he got to Laban. Like, well, who would have taken it? Esau. Esau must have sent somebody to rob him or to take him, but Jacob didn't fight him, so it must have been he gave him willingly. So that's where this whole conversation comes from. These midrashim are not just pulled out of thin air. They are raised by the questions in the text, which if we're reading the text carefully, we would have the same questions too, except we're so used to the text, we don't ask any questions, we just read it. This is the thing about Jacob. But he said, this is where it's going to be important. He said, I came, for with my staff, I crossed this Jordan. So it says, so he did have something. He had his staff. So why did he have his staff? Why didn't Esau take that too? It says, well, this wasn't just like your average walking stick. This was his staff. And Jacob said, you can have everything except my staff. Why? Since the staff was hollow, and in the staff was oil. And the oil he used to create light, fire, would burn a little bit to study Torah. So that he would give everything, all of his possessions, up to his very life, but not his Torah, not his staff. And that Torah that he had learned, it's like it wasn't just in the house of Isaac and Rebekah. It says that after he fled from his home, it says that he studied in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, who were descendants of Noah, for 14 years. And he learned the Torah of Exile, whatever that means. That's a whole other conversation. I don't know really what that means. He learned the Torah of Exile. He studied there, and then he went to Laban. So there was an elapsed time there. And that he used this oil, and he would not part with that oil. That oil that was used specifically for Torah study, and tremendous, said he never slept. He was learning day and night. He was always learning. The Mesiras Nefesh, that the self-sacrifice that he put into his Torah study, using that oil, says that oil was the oil that was found for the miracle of the Hanukkah story. That it wasn't just, hey, we found some oil, it's pure, let's use this. It says, even if you did, upon what was the miracle based? Why did it last for 8 days when we know it shouldn't have? Was it just I mean, honestly, I would have thought, well, it's just enough that there was a regular kind of a miracle. That's amazing. But this is saying, no, that miracle was paid for. That miracle was paid for through the Torah learning of Jacob. And that he passed that down to his descendants. And that is the light. That's the light of the menorah that we have, which is why it lasted for those 8 days, is it had been paid for. So when we think about it, it's like, what does it mean it has to be paid for? We tend to think of a miracle as being free. You know, God did a miracle for me. But the question is, it maybe was done for you in your time, but there was somebody in the past who did something, blood, sweat, and tears, effort, energy, commitment, something that allows that miracle to happen. It's not such a thing to have a free miracle. It's not. We know even in the Purim story. Yes, Andy.
I'm sorry. Did you say that in between the time he was fleeing, after he studied for 14 years before he went to Laban?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. And then he spent that time in learning. And that was Torah. Whatever that means, I don't know exactly what that means. All the Torah of Exile is somehow preparing him. Maybe it's like all the laws of living with swindlers, because that's certainly where he was going. But he had to learn, you have to learn the Torah of your situation. So you know how to behave and how to preserve yourself. He also had to become very strong, because when you live in an environment that is evil, you have to be able to maintain your purity, to maintain your identity, because we're so influenced by our surroundings. It is almost inevitable that we're going to be impacted. Even in kind of like, I won't say cute, funny ways, but I remember when our daughter would go to camp. She went to Camp Mosheva, which was in Wild Rose, Wisconsin. And a lot of the kids were from Chicago. Every summer, after only 8 weeks, she came home with a slight Chicago accent. She's pronouncing things differently. And it's like, you're from Denver. Like, why are you talking like? When you're around people, you absorb their thoughts. It's like, that's why there's very kind of strict laws of even the laws of kashrut, of having kosher food is one of the ways that we keep ourselves distant from people who are not eating kosher food, of not drinking with other people. It's like when you share people's food, you share their ideas. You take it in and you become that, and it's absorbed, and you become who they are. You are what you eat. So this kind of ability for Yaakov to be able to live with Laban and to maintain his identity and his integrity and not get sucked into his lifestyle and the surrounding culture was huge. It says you have to be really well prepared before you go into that environment. And so he studied, it says, in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver for 14 years. With that, then he goes to Laban. He has nothing except his staff. He has nothing except this oil. And this oil, again, gets passed down. Now, I'm thinking here like, well, let's see, 14 years, how much oil could really be in that staff? But whatever, that's a part of the story I don't know. But that's what that represented, was the effort. And we'll even describe somebody who's working really hard. We'll say they burned the midnight oil, right? It's like they were really putting in a lot of effort. So the oil itself becomes a symbol of the learning and of the effort that went into the learning and that went into who he became. That, done by great-great-great-great-grandfather Jacob, says then becomes the oil that is the miracle oil that allows the menorah to stay lit, that oil to last for 8 days. The number 8 is always associated with being above nature, of being in the realm of miraculous, and that's what it was signifying, and that's what the Jewish people needed at that time. So who knows what things your ancestors have done from your past that have given you your ability to achieve in your lifetime. You can say it was a miracle. I don't know where this came from. It's like, it came from someplace. It's not out of thin air. We know that the Jewish people, this is what triggered the miracle of the Jewish people being saved at Purim time. We say Esther, but there still had to be a merit. What's the merit for the miracle? And it says the school children learning. It says that Haman heard the children learning, and he was like, I'm not going to be successful. I'm not going to be successful. His own wife told him he wasn't going to be successful. He said, if Mordechai is starting to go up, you're going to go down and you will surely not prevail. And she said, that's the relationship. When Yaakov is up, Esav is down. And if you are a descendant of Esav, you're starting to go down, you are going to continue to go down, because that's the relationship. So in this struggle, there are times when Esav is prevailing and there's times when Jacob is prevailing. The key to it, though, is what we do and the effort that we put in. That's the origin of Hanukkah Gelt. Hanukkah Gelt was to reward the children for their Torah learning. Okay, the fact that it's gotten turned into semi-Christmas and that it's, and I'm guilty of this too. We give presents and things like that to our grandkids, and then it's turned into that, but that's not what it was. So it's become a little Aesop-like. It's become kind of a mixture, but the original intent was to give the children a reward for their Torah learning. Say something, give it of our Torah and give money for the Torah learning. That's the gift, because that's the real wealth. So Jacob could give up everything, his clothes, all the possessions, whatever he left his home with to go to his uncle Laban, he was willing to give up everything except for his staff. So now it makes sense when he said, I've crossed the Jordan with my staff. And that's what that's what I'm hanging on to. And then I turned into the 2 camps that I have, my family, all my wealth, and all of it is great. But what I really value is my staff, because that's the root of it is my Torah study. So when we think about Hanukkah and observing Hanukkah, it's really an opportunity to think about our own Torah study, and also making Torah as the litmus test for what we do, what we say, what we buy, where we go, how we think. It's like, does it pass Torah muster? That's the litmus test. If it passes the Torah, then we say it can come in. And if it doesn't, it has to stay out. So we think about the menorah, which is traditionally lit outside, whether we light it outside or not, to think about it of being outside, it's a protection on the door. So on one side, we have the mezuzah on the right, and on the left, we have the menorah. And that is saying, like, these are like the guards at the door. I'm guarding you with menorah and with the mezuzah. What's coming in the door? And whatever we let in the door is what's going to influence us the most. And now in our time, where we are sitting here, thankfully, using the gift of technology, things got past the door that Mrs. Cleaver never would have let in. It's like, you're not bringing that in here. That's like the famous words of mother. You're not bringing that in here, whether it's a lost dog or whatever, you're not bringing that in here. Nobody's saying you're not bringing that in here in our world today. And we have to exercise that. We have to be the menorah and the mezuzah of our doorways, of what goes into our minds, what goes into our eyes, and what we are experiencing. And there's no such thing as anything neutral. It's going to be on one side or the other. Either it's going to be, if it passes Torah muster, then it can come in. And there are many, many things, thankfully, that do. It's not that we are very much in this world. There are a lot of things that we can let in, but we have to be discriminating. We have to differentiate. We have to have the clarity. And the clarity comes from studying Torah so that we know what goes in and what goes out. That's what Jacob needed to know. And that's why that oil was so valuable to him. That's why his staff was so valuable to him. And with that clarity, that was the miracle of Hanukkah. When you have a civil war, okay, on one hand, it's sad enough you have a civil war. With Purim, it was clear. It was Jews against the non-Jews. But the staff is look at it. Thank you, Esther. There's different words for it. Here it is makel. A makel is the word for the staff used here. So that we have to have this clarity. Let's see if now I forgot what I was saying. We have to have this clarity in order to be able to make this differentiation. So when we think about Hanukkah, and you're supposed to look at the flames, it says looking at the flames purifies our eyes. In other words, it gives us clarity so that we can truly see the difference between what we're doing and what we shouldn't be doing. So again, it's so ironic and also beautiful in its own way that Hanukkah is so widely celebrated by Jewish people who are completely assimilated. They're so assimilated that they've mixed Hanukkah in with Christmas. They have a Hanukkah bush and Hanukkah stockings or whatever it is they're doing. So I know some people are always very happy when they see Christmas decorations up and that somebody also, like at a store or whatever, also puts up a menorah. We do not need a menorah up with Christmas decorations. They are not, Hanukkah is not the Jewish Christmas. We don't need those things together. To show how the world is so Christian oriented. So, my husband worked for the city for 35 years and he worked across the street from the city and county building, which to this day still puts up a creche. They still have a nativity scene that they put up, and it's gone to court and everything. And everyone's like, no, that's American. That's not religious. Like, there's an establishment clause in the Constitution. And I'm all for Christians being Christian, but our government is not Christian, except that it is. So it's interesting. And he would have to look at that every day as he came to work. And it's just looks so pagan, so pagan. It's like, that's not us. I'm glad he didn't have to go often into the sitting county building for those days when it was up. You know, people flock to see it. It was like, it really reminds us we live in a Christian nation that does not even see Christianity as a religion. It sees it as part of the identity of our people, of the people of this country. And again, God bless the people who are Christian and who are guided by the morality that Christianity gives to the world. Thank God, but it doesn't belong in the government. So the fact that people are oblivious to that, they have no clarity around that. So being Jewish and having the Torah as our guide really is it's an uphill battle. I was saying to a friend of mine, who were talking about different struggles of being Jewish, said we should really be eating salmon as the food for both Purim and Hanukkah, because salmon swim upstream. And it's like, we are the people, we are so counterculture, and this is the time when we celebrate it. So having Jew versus Jew, says it's given as one of the reasons why the book of Maccabees is not part of Tanakh. There are many other reasons as well, but it's a little embarrassing that there were so many Jews against their own Jewish brethren. It wasn't just one person trying to assassinate another, like, God forbid, like Gedaliah, who was assassinated by a Jew, the governor of the Jewish people at the time of the destruction, but that you had masses of Jewish people within the land of Israel who were willing and very happy to go along with the Greek lifestyle. So, and everything that brought. So there's a lot in Greek, there's a lot of Western civilization that we embrace, that we love, we value, we cherish, but it has to be able to pass the guards at the door. And the guards at the door, the oil of the menorah and the Torah that is in the mezuzah. And in a way, they both stand for Torah, because inside that beautiful mezuzah case are statements from the Torah. And the menorah is also about the wisdom of the Torah. So basically, whether you're passing the light of the menorah or the parchment of the mezuzah, it's going through, it's like a double guard at the time of Hanukkah. And the time of Hanukkah is the time of darkness. It's the time of the year, it's the time of our national situation of darkness, where we cannot see and we need extra help to be able to see, because it's not easy. The Jewish people have never been accused of being stupid. You know, the Jewish people who fell for the assimilation, it wasn't just for power and prestige. It was because it was pleasurable. There was something very satisfying about it, and it was rewarding in a lot of different ways. It's very hard to say no. You know, it's like saying no to fattening desserts. You have to have, we like them because they give us pleasure. So when something is pleasurable, we have to have a higher pleasure that makes us willing to say no to it. That's the hard part. So being willing to say no to something requires clarity. That clarity requires light. That clarity requires Torah study. So all of us here today who are working on that for ourselves and hopefully finding clarity, and the more Torah study, the better. So I would encourage you to give yourself a Hanukkah present and buy yourself a book about something that is Torah related. It's any area that is of interest to you. To buy something and to read and to do more learning. And if you're not already doing something on a daily basis of learning, to try to do a little something. There's so many things that have like a daily read that takes about 90 seconds to read. Just a little something. It doesn't mean that you spend every waking moment, but if a day starts with a Torah base, that's a cushion and it's clarity to help us go through the rest of the day. God willing, our Torah, our Hanukkah is going to bring us even more clarity at a time in our world where there is so much confusion and there is so much for us to sort out. We don't even know how to sort it out. Nobody even knows where to begin. And the Torah is the place for us. Jacob is the place for us. He is the person of truth. He's the person of Torah. He valued his staff more than anything. And it says, I crossed the Jordan with my staff, and now I am two people. I'm two camps. It's not something that's just an incidental remark that's made in the Torah. It's giving us real information about who Jacob is and what he has given to us as the Jewish people, as his descendants. Thank God for it. So we should all be worthy of miracles. We tie ourselves, the more we tie ourselves to our ancestors, meaning not just that we mention their names, but that we really try to access and latch onto what they stood for and to realize the spiritual gifts they have given us. We do have the wherewithal to withstand. We do. You know, you think of somebody like Rabbi Lau, surviving, thank God for his brother. You know, in his book, he describes, you know, his brother really was the one who protected him. But still, he was a child in a concentration camp. And the fact that he survived intact as a human being, losing his family, who knows what horrors he witnessed. I mean, your brother can only protect you from so much. What he witnessed and what would be a legitimate scarring on his soul and a scarring on his psyche, he would say was protected by his Torah study. And so maybe limping, but not destroyed. And then to go on to become, you know, the chief rabbi of Israel. And the fact that he is still so strong. I mean, I don't know how old he is. So if he was, let's see, how old would he be? Whatever, he's got to be like in his 70s, early 80s. I mean, he's got to be at that age. I'm not sure how old he is now. If he was 8 at the time of the liberation. But in any case, I'm not sure I would do that for my own child. Get on a plane and make an international trip and fly to Denver to give strength and encouragement to the Denver community and to the Torah community and to Jewish people, and then get on a plane and fly back for that many hours. I'm sorry, that takes a lot of just plain old endurance. Where do you get that from? You say, well, he has an unusually strong constitution. I don't know, but the motivation to do that, you have to really be committed. So just the fact that he made the trip, he didn't even have to say anything inspiring. Just the fact that he came would have been inspiring. But that he came and spoke, and the eternality of the Jewish people was so incredibly memorable. Like, okay, I think I need to up my game here of like, what do I have the koach for? What do I have the strength for? So in Israel, just kids in general, when they don't want to do something, they just say, Ein li koach, you know, I don't have the strength. And that could mean like, you know, set the table, you know, or, you know, go make your bed or something like Ein li koach. But people use it as a general thing, like Ein li koach, to do whatever. It's like, wow, I think I need to be motivated by this of Ken, yesh li koach. I do have the koach, I do have the strength. And the source of the strength is God. It says that God gives strength to the weary. God gives strength to the weary. Jacob prays for strength in his battle against Esau. And he is worried that he's been so blessed that he's kind of used up his points. But he prays to God in any case. And after he prays, he shows no fear. And it's interesting. He was fearful at first. He prays, and then he is not fearful. And in the end, he does not divide his camp, just for the record. So he has his whole plan. I'm going to divide the camp, the handmaidens, and they'll go one direction, and Rachel and Leah. In the end, he doesn't do that, because we know that when he actually meets up with Esau, it's beautiful. When he meets Esau, at first it says, he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 handmaids. He put the handmaids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he himself went on ahead of them and bowed earthward 7 times until he reached his brother. This is on page 177, the beginning of chapter 33. But then all of a sudden it says that Esau, verse 5, he raised his eyes and saw the women and children, and he asked, who are these to you? And he answered, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the handmaids came forward, they and their children, and they bowed down. Leah came forward, and afterwards Joseph and Rachel. Says, what about dividing the camp? this is not really divided. I mean, maybe they were standing in rows, one behind the next, but this camp is not so divided. All of them come forward to bow to Esau. So whatever there was, it got modified to, instead of dividing the camp, I'm not sure, putting men in between them so that if somebody was wiped out, but if somebody with 400 men is coming at you to destroy you, is it going to really help you if the handmaidens are standing in row 1 and Leah's in row 2 and Rachel's in row 3? It's like, that's nothing. So something must have happened to Jacob's confidence. So he still put them in rows of like the most precious in the back. Sorry, that was Rachel. But he doesn't divide them and put them in different places in the encampment. So something happened to his fear level. And he is in a different place by the time he actually sees Esau. It's really fascinating. So it's that righteous people get scared. That God instilled within us the ability to feel fear so that we take normal precautions to protect ourselves. You have to do that. We don't want to be like children or adolescents who just like go merrily on their way without thinking about anything. We have to take precautions. But the deep-seated fear, says that was addressed through his prayer. When he prays to God, then he is able to come to a different place where he's able to then face Esau and not be afraid, because we don't hear the word of being afraid anymore after his initial statement that he was afraid. So this encounter of Jacob, first with the Sar of Esau, with the angel of Esau, who tries to destroy him, but wounds him in his socket, of his hip socket, where the legs are attached. Where the legs are attached, it says Netzach and Hod, that those are Purim and Hanukkah, and those are the holidays where Esau is trying to destroy the Jewish people in one of two ways. Either we try to destroy their Torah, or we try to destroy them physically at Purim, the Torah at Hanukkah. And those are the two pillars. Those are the challenges of the Jewish people. Jacob continues on limping, and those are places of vulnerability for the Jewish people. And to this day, to remember that powerfully in our mind, we don't eat that part of the animal, because we want to always remember that those are the existential threats against the Jewish people that we need to brace ourselves for and be prepared for. And that the antidote to it is Jacob's staff. Jacob's staff that had the oil in it was the only one possession that he insisted on hanging on to, because that was the oil that he used to learn Torah and was the embodiment of the effort he went to learn Torah, to take that in so that he could go to Laban's house, be in exile, and emerge healthy spiritually and physically, as we do too. So God willing, we will light those first lights of Hanukkah, and I will see you. Let's see, will Hanukkah still be, I think, will we still have Hanukkah when we get together the following Thursday? I think so. We'll get together, but light those lights. And women, just so you know, women are supposed to sit with the light and just look at it. Just gaze at the light and not do work, not do any malacha while the flames are burning, unless you have an oil menorah. If you have an oil menorah, it lasts several hours. It's a little too long. So a half hour. Women, married, single, any girl over the age of 12 sits with her lights and just gazes at the lights. The merit of the Jewish women in the Hanukkah story. You were in my class on Tuesday. We talked about it, so I won't repeat it here. The merit of the Jewish women to just take in the light. But everybody is supposed to spend time looking at the light and having our brains, our minds infused with the light, the illumination, the clarity that Hanukkah brought to the Jewish people. So I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving for those who celebrate Thanksgiving. That would be me. And a happy first days of Hanukkah. And I'll look forward to seeing you a week from next Thursday. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And one other thing I wanted to tell you is I have a few openings in my trip to Israel, which is going from February 14th through the 24th. Would love to have you come with me. Please, you can send me an email. You got my email with the link. Be in touch with me. We're going to try to kind of finalize our group in the next week and a half or so by the end of Hanukkah. And I would love to have you join me. So let me know if you are interested or if you know somebody else who would be. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and I will see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
Ellyn.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Hey, Ellen, can I ask
Yes.
you one quick question?
Of
I had
course.
to go take care of something when you were talking. How is the oil passed down from Jacob for Hanukkah? I missed
It
that.
was handed down through the generations, and it ended up getting put into the Beit HaMikdash. So it just went down through the centuries because it was very valuable.
How did he get the oil then?
How did he get the oil? So I've heard other midrashim who said that the oil actually came from Noach. That originally came from olives that were on the olive branch that Noach, when he sent the dove out who brought back the olive branch, that the oil that came from that was that oil.
Thank you.
You are welcome. All right. Thank you so much. It's great to see all of you. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ellen.
My pleasure. Thank you.